Welcome back to Partners in Crime. This is our final episode of the semester. I'm so glad you're joining us. I'm Karoline.
And I'm Kailee.
And this is Partners in Crime. Yeah! Whoa! Crowd goes wild!
And this week we are both talking about pretty long cases, pretty semi-famous cases, and I'm going to be talking about the BTK Killer, which is also known as Dennis Rader. And he is an American serial killer who goes by the common nickname BTK, which he gave himself. It stands for Blind, Torture, and Kill. He killed 10 people between 1974 and 1991, but before we get into the murders, I want to dive into who he was as a person and his past life.
Can we just talk about the fact that he gave himself the nickname?
I know.
How lame. You can't give yourself a nickname. That's not how it works.
The news is supposed to do that. The paper.
Right.
But Dennis Rader was born on March 9th, 1945 in Pittsburgh, but he grew up in Wichita, Kansas. And growing up, he was paid very little attention to by his parents. It was something that he described as feeling ignored by his mother, which he resented her a lot for. And from a young age, he had sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing people, specifically women, and he would torture... What?
All sympathy out the window now.
Yeah, for sure. He would torture and kill small animals growing up, and he would spy on his female neighbors dressed in women's clothing himself, and he would steal underwear from his female neighbors, and he would masturbate with ropes and bindings around, like, while watching the women. Yeah. It's disgusting. Sorry. It is disgusting.
Just picturing that. Terrifying. Nightmare-inducing.
Yes. And he would take pictures of himself in the women's clothing and, like, a mask that's like a female mask is what it was described as, and he would be tied down and he would just take pictures of himself like that. And he was pretending to be one of his victims as a part of, like, a sexual fantasy that he had. So that's why that he did that. And regardless of all of this, he kept this extremely well hidden from everyone, his wife, his children included. He was...
He had a family? He was a family man and he was doing this?
Yeah, a wife and 2 kids. He was well liked by the community, actually. He was a member of the local church, and he was a Boy Scout leader.
You know, it's always the Boy Scout leaders.
That's true. And the church leaders, I feel like. Some, maybe.
100%.
Yeah.
The overlap there is really where it lies.
Mm-hmm. But according to his kids and just, like, some accounts that his wife had said, that the life at home was perfectly normal. So he was pretty much living a double life. Like, they did not know anything about this until he got arrested, pretty much. But now that we know the little backstory, let's get into the cases. On January 15th, 1974, 4 members of the Oterio family were murdered in Wichita. They were Joseph Oterio, Julie Oterio, Joseph Oterio Jr., and then Josephine Oterio. They were discovered by the family's 3 older kids who weren't home at the time, and he tied them up as well. The youngest one was 9 years old, and I think I read that he killed him last. But between the spring of 1974 and the winter of 1977, he killed 3 more women named Catherine Bright, Nancy Fox, Shirley Van Relford. And after these murders, he sent a letter to the TV station KAKE in Wichita, claiming to be responsible for the Oterio murders and the murders of those 3 women. This is where he called himself the BTK Killer. He demanded media attention, and he basically just described the murders in extreme details. And I cannot find the letters, though, which is really annoying because I wanted to see them.
Did you tried looking for them, though?
Yeah,
I'm surprised it's not online.
I know, it's not. Like, the only letters that are online are the ones he sent his daughter when he was in jail.
BTK letters.
I thought I wrote down his names. I didn't. Let me see if I can find it again because I want to see it because I thought they were funny. Oh, he gave them 3 options: BTK Strangler, BTK Killer.
How stupid, though, is BTK Killer?
I know.
Butcher, killer.
The Wichita Strangler, the Wichita Hangman.
Asphyxiator.
Oh, okay.
Asphyxiator. Like a superhero?
Oh my god, that's what he was going for.
Killing people out of mercy. Ari, what's your rating of him? I'd give him maybe a solid 8. Because if he wasn't a killer, I feel like he'd be like my drunk uncle.
You're the first part, love. What are you talking about?
A solid 8? I thought you were gonna pull out a 4. Oh, she inverted the scale.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's acceptable.
That's better than. But he called himself BTK Killer in the letter. He demanded media attention. In the letter, there was a poem titled "Oh, Death to Nancy," where he claimed to be driven by a supernatural element to kill the people, and that he was motivated by Jack the Ripper, Son of Sam, and the Hillside Strangler. This wasn't the end of his murder spree. He attempted to kill 63-year-old Anna Williams in 1979, but she avoided it after she arrived home later than he had expected her to be home. He sat and waited at her house for hours, but she didn't come home, so he left, and he became obsessed with her. He was absolutely livid, is what he said in quotes, that she didn't come home. And he never killed her, but I think he, stalked her a little bit. And in 1985, he killed Maureen Hedge and took her body to the church that he was president of the church council of. He photographed her body in different bondage positions in the church, and then he dumped her into a ditch. His final victim was Dorlis E. Davis in 1991. And there was no information about this person, but this was the last one. And then in 2004, it was considered a cold case until he sent 11 letters to local media stations claiming that he was going to kill again, describing all the murders that happened before, and it just ended up in his arrest on February 25th, 2005. And that was the end of his murder sprees. He's still alive. He's still in jail. I think he's on death row. Let me double check that. No, he's just life in prison. But yeah, I watched his confession a little bit. It was a 40-minute video, so I didn't watch the whole thing. But he's completely, it's he's just talking to somebody, describing these murders and describing what he did. It's just he's explaining something. Huh?
Detached.
Yeah, it's creepy, but it's interesting to me. But yeah, that's BTK Killer.
BTK Killer.
BTK.
Fine torture killer. I heard that he was really angry though when people stopped caring about it. So
yeah, and he sent letters in years later because of that, and that's what got him arrested because nobody knew who it was.
I really enjoyed it, Kaylee. You did a great job.
Thank you. Now let's hear yours, Karoline.
Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna be talking about the Black Dahlia. No, but for real. Let's get into this. No, I'm sorry, that's so bad. We can't use that.
That's perfect. I loved it.
So let's just dive right in. The Black Dahlia. On January 15th, 1947, the mutilated body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found cut in half at the waist and drained of all blood in a vacant lot in Los Angeles. That is a good opening. That is CSI material right there.
Yes.
Beautiful. The body was discovered by Betty Bersinger and her daughter walking past on their way to buy some shoes. At first glance, the woman thought the figure was a store mannequin because it was in 2 different pieces, but she realized it was a body and phoned the police at a near house. So Elizabeth's body was found completely severed at the waist, drained of all blood. Her face had been cut from the corners of her mouth to her ears, giving her a Glasgow smile. And she had several cuts on her thighs and breast, and portions of her flesh had been actually like cut away, including a singular nipple, which
One nipple was cut off?
one nipple that stuck with me.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Her intestines had been, quote, neatly tucked under her buttocks. And the lower half of her body was a foot away from the upper portion. And her body was also like poised a certain way. So her hands were over her head and elbows bent at right angles, and then her legs were spread apart, knees straight. But before we continue, let's actually give the victim an identity. Her name is Elizabeth Short, but she liked to go by Betty. Her father, Cleo Short, built miniature golf courses until 1929. That's when the stock market crashed. And it left the Short family short for cash. In 1930, thank you, Kailee, in 1930, her father's car was later found abandoned on a bridge, leaving people to assume he had committed suicide. But then in 1942, her father contacted her mother to apologize and explain that he just started a new life in California, which
That's crazy.
12 years go by and you're like, hey, I want to apologize and maybe you can come out here with me.
No.
But no. Betty was the only one of her family to accept her father's apology, and she moved out to California to be with him. But arguments broke out between the two quite frequently, and so she actually moved out by January 1943, so just a few months there. And then from that point on, she moved around a lot. Like, I could not find like a steady timeline. Researching this case, like, Kailee, this was so freaking difficult because I had like read on the Wikipedia page, and then I found this YouTube video, and it was like, if you've been researching about the Black Dahlia, you've been lied to. And I was like, what do you what do you mean? And it said a lot of the stuff online is not true, and it's because it's from newspapers during the time that were just like lying, like tabloids, and now people think it's fact. So I had a really hard time finding stuff that was like truthful. So from 1943 to 1947, I don't really know what she was doing. But, and then this section of the paper I called Moida time. So on January 9th, 1947, Betty was returned home from a trip to San Diego with Robert Red Manley, who was a 25-year-old married salesman that Betty had been apparently dating. Manley stated that he dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and according to Manley, Betty had plans to meet with her sister, who was visiting from Boston that afternoon. The Biltmore staff recalled seeing Betty using the telephone, and then later that day, she was also seen at this lounge that was like right down the street from the hotel. But after that, she goes missing. There's nothing known about her whereabouts until January 15th, where Betty finds her on the street. So after identifying the body, it actually was not the police who identified the next of kin. It was reporters from the LA Examiner, and they called her mother, pretended to be judges from a beauty pageant, and they said that Betty had won the contest and they just needed like address and things like that. For whatever reason, I don't understand how her mother like fell for this, and like, I don't know, but I will not blame her or give her any crap, because at the end of getting all this information, the reporters were like, oh, actually, your daughter has been murdered, and then like hung up the phone.
What?
And that's how she found out.
That's terrible.
No.
Wait, what year was this again?
47.
Okay. I mean, I feel like that, for that time, I feel like that's probably...
Like, what? I can imagine the little, like, rat, like, reporters being like,
Who killed your daughter?
hello, is this Mrs. Short? Yeah. No, why am I British all of a sudden? Okay, no, that was bad. So yeah, no, that's how she had to find out, and that And then later, I read that they attempted to make it up to her, and they flew her out to LA, but then because they were like, we'll fly you out here because the police want to see you, but we'll pay for your ticket to make it up to you. And she was like, okay, bet. And so they fly her out there, and they won't let her go anywhere near the police. They just want more information for their stories. I don't know. Just reporters in this time were like terrible people.
So snaky.
Yes. Her cause of death was stated to be hemorrhaging from the lacerations to her face and the shock of the blows to the head and face as well. But the part that's like most telling is the separation of her torso. It was completed by a surgical procedure that was taught in the 1930s. And the lower half of her body had been removed by cutting the lumbar spine between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. And the coroner noted that there was very little bruising along the incision line, which first off, this means that it was post-mortem, but then also it was done in such a way that they could tell that it must have been someone who had a medical history and like was trained as like a doctor to do this. And that's like really what helped them rule out people for the suspects. And as for the suspects, I have 5 people to talk about.
Okay.
In actuality, there were like 60 people at least who called, and they're like, hey, I did it. And there were so many people who were also like calling and saying, I know who did it. It was my father, and like offering up like brothers and uncles. And like, it was just really, I don't know, really strange, like the phenomenon that was taking people over in the 1950s. But the first one that I want to get into, this is my personal favorite conspiracy or like theory. His name is Walter Bailey, and he was never a suspect in the crime, but I think he's actually like really worth talking about. So he was an LA surgeon who lived 1 block south of the vacant lot in which her body was found. That is until he left his wife in October 1946, and I will remind you that the body was found in January 1947.
Okay.
Okay. His daughter was a friend of Betty's sister, so there's a connection. And then when Bailey died in January 1948, his autopsy showed that he was suffering from a degenerative brain disease that was known to produce violent behavior in otherwise passive individuals. Also, before I go any further, I have to introduce this other guy called Larry Harnish, who he was a writer or like a wannabe writer in like the late 90s, I believe, and he got a job offer to write about the Black Dahlia for this newspaper, and he took it, and he's become like obsessed now with the case. And he's okay, so we are now introduced to Larry Harnish. So he was talking to Bailey's former receptionist, and he discovered that Bailey and his mistress would at dinner time watch movies of surgeries and autopsies, which I just thought was a funny little hobby. I'll call it that. But Bailey, at 67 years old at the time of the murder, had no history of violence or criminal activity of any kind, and he was not known to have met Betty, even though his daughter was a friend of her sister. But in devising his theory, Harnish consulted retired FBI profiler who advised that the popular location of the dump site was significant since the killer had the ability to transport it anywhere he wanted to. But he chose it a block away from where Bailey's estranged wife was. And then Douglas also advised that the FBI profiler also advised the facial lacerations indicated personal anger towards the victim. And so a little tidbit about Betty, she would often tell men that she had a son who died tragically, which was just full baloney. But Bailey did in fact have a son who was struck by a car and killed at age 11. The deceased child's birthday was January 13th, and Betty's body was found on January 15th. So that's all the information about him. Again, he's dead. He died a year after the murder, but there are just a lot of like coincidences, I guess.
How convenient he died a year later.
Right. And he did have the brain disease, so it's very possible that even though he didn't have any violent like history, brain was leaving him, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. The next one. I only pulled out the ones that I thought were just either interesting or like worth actually looking into. So the next one's name is Joseph A. Dumas, who was a 29-year-old soldier who is stationed. Hold on. Dumas was a 29-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey, who confessed to Betty's murder a few weeks after it occurred. He claimed that he was out on a drinking binge with Betty a few nights before the body was found, but he had blacked out at some point and woke up in a taxi outside of a hotel. And he like was very adamant, saying like, I killed her, like I know I did it because I was with her and now she's dead and I don't remember what happened. I must have killed her. But there were a lot of people who said like, no, he was at the like the army base during that time. And so even though he was cleared of any involvement, he still claims like well into the 50s that he killed Betty. And yeah, but he was cleared. Like I said, a lot of people wanted to be like guilty.
Yeah.
I think just like for the fame. This is the one that like a lot of people really like. His name is George Hodell. So Dr. George Hill Hodell Jr. came into police scrutiny in 49 when his 14-year-old daughter Tamar, I think is how you say it, accused him of molesting her. And even though there were 3 people saying that they had seen this happen, he was acquitted in December 1949. Okay, but anyway, the trial led the LAPD to include Hodell, who at the time was a physician. And so police put Hodell under surveillance from February 18th to March 27th, 1950, to see if he could be implicated in any way. And in the surviving transcripts of the recordings, Hodell was heard making a highly incriminating statements, such as, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't even talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now that they may have it figured out, killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary. But I will say that later on in the before in the transcript, he's like, yeah, I know my phone is tapped. So it's like he was almost playing with them. But the secretary that he was talking about was named Ruth Spalding, who police had previously suspected of being murdered by Hodell in 1945, because he was present when she overdosed, and he burnt some of her papers before the police were called. But the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. And documents were later found, though, that indicated Spalding was about to publicly accuse Hodell of intentionally misdiagnosing patients and billing them for laboratory testing, medical treatments, and prescriptions that were not needed. And so Hodell's son was a former LAPD homicide detective. His name is Steve Hodell, and he believes that Short may have been one of his father's patients. So that's where he thinks the tie is. And in 2003, Steve Hodell published a book, Black Dahlia Avenger, a Genius for Murder, in which he claims his father, who died in 1999, had murdered Betty and was responsible for other unresolved killings over 2 decades. Steve had also seen 2 pictures in his father's photo albums that he claims is Betty, but I've seen the pictures and I'll show them to you right now, Kaylee. I don't think there's any. They just don't look like her. But you can tell me what you think. Okay, so this is the picture that he found, and this is Elizabeth.
They have 2 different noses.
Right.
Like her nose is very skinny.
Now, I think this woman has been identified, but there's this other woman who, again, just doesn't look like her. I can't get them on the same page, but It's just a white woman with dark hair.
Yeah, that doesn't look like her to me either. But her eyes are like they both have closed eyes, so like you can't really tell.
Right.
I don't know.
I don't think.
I don't think either of them are her though.
Oh, no. But he is like adamant that it was his father. And since the beginning of his investigation, um, Steve has located and identified one of the photographs, but the other one still remains unidentified. Um, so after reviewing some of the information in Steve's book, the head deputy proclaimed that the case was solved, but others were like, you formed this conclusion by treating Steve's many disputed assertions as fact, and they were like, you can't do that. There's nothing like actually tying him to the case. It's just his son being like, I think he did it, and I found these pictures and they're sketchy. Um, but in 2009, Hodell also published a book called Most Evil: Adventure, Zodiac, and Further Serial Murders of George Hill Hodell, in which he claimed that his father was also the Zodiac killer.
Um,
So I don't know why. He just really wants his father to be a murderer. And I don't get it.
I don't know. I guess like that's interesting and you get fame from it, but
It makes no sense.
no, it doesn't make any sense.
Um, and this is another example of someone wanting their father to be the killer. So this is about George Knowlton, and he died in 1962, and he also lived in LA. But in the early 1990s, his daughter Janice has started going to therapy because she was suffering from depression, and she also said that she had these recovered memories, and she said that she remembered um, she alleged that her father had been having an affair with Elizabeth Short and that she had been staying in a makeshift bedroom in their garage, and that is where she suffered a miscarriage. And she details all this in her book called Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer. Um, so everyone's writing books.
I was gonna say, how do all these people just get published about the same thing?
And they actually dug up this man's backyard because she said, like, he made her help carry the body outside and dig the hole. But they dug it up and there was nothing there. So, and that brings us to our last suspect that I decided to include, who was the man who dropped her off at the hotel, Robert M. Red Manley. Um, his is kind of sad. So he was the top suspect because he was the last person to see her alive. But after two polygraph tests and a sworn alibi, he was set free. Um, he had been discharged from the army earlier because of mental disability. And due to all the accusations and like, I don't know if bullying isn't the right word, but like harassment of being like, you're the Black Dahlia murderer, he suffered many nervous breakdowns and he claimed to be hearing voices. And so he was committed to the state hospital by his wife in 1954, and he died in 86 due to an accidental fall.
Oh,
Yeah, that's all I have. It's unsolved still. I think it's like one of the oldest unsolved is something I read, but that doesn't make sense. Have you ever seen the pictures of it?
I watched
I
BuzzFeed Unsolved a while ago. Like it's been a few years of this murder, so like I knew about it. I was trying to think the whole time what suspect that they talked about, and I feel like it was one of the doctors, but I don't know which one. I can't remember.
Hodell is a big one that a lot of people think,
I feel like it was Hodell. Like that name when you said that, I was like, I think that was the one that they talked about.
but the William Bailey is the one who like just a lot of coincidences at being a mile away from his recently divorced wife. Like they got a divorce like 4 months before the murder. Um, yeah, I don't know. And then it was the wife, Ruth Bailey. The new suspect. We've cracked the case.
We've solved murder.
Oh, he was having an affair. She was pissed.
Yeah.
There
And
you
so when he divorced
Cut off her
her,
arms. Cut off her legs. Cut off her.
that whore, and then killed her publicly to shame her.
Ari
Laid her out in the street.
Laid her out in the street. Like
Only
a
took
slut.
one nipple.
She is.
Ew, calm down. Is he coming?
The Essler. No, the only thing about Hodell that I do think is like worthy is the fact that he is a skilled doctor.
Yeah.
Now Bailey was a surgeon, but he only did like mastectomies or like hysterectomies.
Mm.
So I don't know if he could do a whole slicing in two to a person.
Yeah.
And they said like she was so white, like the color of my door, like type white.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's all I got. The Black Dahlia.
That was a good job. It was good. I enjoyed it. Of course. Well, thank you for listening to the last episode of season 1 of Partners in Crime.
But we're going to be having another season next semester, so make sure to tune in for it. I'm Karoline.
And I'm Kaylee, and we will see you in the fall 2021.